Everything is more expensive. That's a shared sentiment at the supermarket in central Arkansas, where people say they're walking away with less after having spent more.
Just because as a single mom, thinking about how prices were years ago, I could use maybe like a small budget, half of what I pay now to get groceries, and now I'm paying double. So it's just looking at the prices, how they were back then versus now. It just makes it a little bit harder.
Back then, I probably wouldn't spend no more than maybe about $200 to $300. Now it's like, $300 to $400. Like prices like that. Because I have kids. I have about 4 kids, so they got to eat too. So I can't just, I can't just buy a little.
For some, with whom the blame lies is clear.
The administration, the people who are in charge.
I think the administration has caused the inflation rate just to go crazy.
These views are not entirely surprising. Arkansas is a conservative stronghold. In the 2020 election, Donald Trump won a little over 62% of the vote here, compared to President Joe Biden's nearly 35%. It's also a state with the highest rate of food insecurity. Wages are anywhere from 15 to 20% lower than the national average, but food is not that much cheaper than anywhere else in the country. And even as the economy has come roaring back and inflation has come down from its mid-2022 peak, prices are still 18% higher than they were when President Joe Biden assumed office. While hourly wages have grown in that time too, they've not completely caught up.
Arkansas is a state that has both a low cost of living but also low incomes. So I think when you see very rapid increase in prices, we have such a high rate of poverty that people will notice that and feel it.
Jeremy Horpedal is an economist at the University of Central Arkansas. He says policies like too much pandemic-era stimulus under Biden could have driven up inflation higher than it would have been otherwise. But he also thinks the president's influence over prices is overstated in the minds of voters.
For most people, they don't really understand where inflation's coming from, and so some of them might look to, say, oh, it must be the fault of the president or someone in Washington. I think as an economist, I look at this and I think, well, this is due to the increase in the money supply and other factors like that, but that's not how a normal person kind of thinks about these things.
Over in this North Little Rock neighborhood, Rick Tatum says he does not trust the government to make sure everyone can afford food.
I expect nothing from politicians. As you can see with nationally, every time you turn around, there's a government shutdown about to happen because they can't agree on things. Why would we put this in their hands, somebody's livelihood, whether they eat tonight or not? Why would we put that in their hands?
Aided by cash and goods donations, Rick Tatum runs a community pantry on his front lawn in response to the rising costs of food and his neighbors' increasing struggle to meet them.
And it was about 9:30 p.m. and a young boy comes and knocks on our door, and I recognize him from the neighborhood, but I don't know his name. And so I open the door and he says, "I'm hungry." And I was like, "Okay, well, what do you want?" And he says, "I like cereal." So I grab a box of cereal out of our personal pantry and I just give it to him and he says, "Thank you," and he just goes off. And that let me know that, hey, there's a need here because that kid walked through this neighborhood at night, which some adults don't do.
Once a week, Rick shops for items with which to stock the community pantry and feed hungry neighborhood children coming home from school.
So usually in this area is where we get like the snack foods. Like, again, these are the things like, they're not on anybody's healthy list, but they're things people like. And so one of the main things that kids usually like are like these Taki snacks.
Having spent $345.87 on the shopping trip, Rick prepares for the day's visitors. It doesn't take long before they come. He's become a fixture in the community, with his neighbors saying the pantry has become essential for them.
They help out. He help out every day.
With grandkids that eat you out of house and home, it's really needed and helpful.
That the community pantry would not be needed one day is a wish he has. But until then, he says he'll continue putting out food every day.
In my community, I don't see it getting better for most people. The reason being is that if you go to the grocery store, you see prices go up, but you seldom see them coming back down. I can tell you the thing that people need most is something that the pantry provides but not is paid for, and that's hope. People need that more than anything, and that's why we do this.
From a community effort to a statewide project, the largest food bank in the state. Operating out of this 9,300 square meter facility, the Arkansas Food Bank says it distributed 40 million pounds of food last year. But CEO Brian Burton points to a much more historical struggle with poverty and food insecurity in the state that may prove difficult to dislodge by any single administration.
We are an agricultural state, and with roots in slavery, tenant farming, sharecropping, all of that changed so much during the 50s, 60s, and 70s as modern farming became mechanized and thousands of laborers, were no longer needed. When that happens, you just see kind of a hopelessness and despair emerge. What happens when a poverty rate climbs up to 35 or 40% in a town? Much of the capital leaves.
Back to the present. A particularly pressing priority for him is the so-called Farm Bill, a law negotiated every 5 years governing agricultural and food programs. It's on the table again, but Democrats and Republicans are divided over the costs for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program within the bill, a program providing monthly benefits to purchase food.
That doesn't make me proud that there are that many people who are hungry and fearful and suffering. And so I think there's a many-pronged strategy in terms of reducing and shortening the line, is what we call that. And I think it does involve government making investments, and we get more people signed up for SNAP benefits because we're one of the lowest participating states.
In this election year, Brian Burton is hoping for policies that will help him feed the hungry, no matter who wins.
When Trump was president, he created something called trade mitigation, where all of the food that was going to be sold to China was redirected to the food banks. And then when the Biden administration came in, they did invest heavily into recovering from COVID. And so I think we need to really understand that there are good ideas in both parties, and we should try to ferret those out and take advantage of those and encourage those rather than just be fussy pants all the time.
At a time and place where poverty, pricing, and politics are all intertwined, the people of Arkansas will have choices to make. Many will have already decided long before the November election who they want to lead them. But in the end, those that need the most help will look much closer to home, towards those that can feed them.